Hey everybody, hope you're all doing well. Today's question is about online versus offline access control. What's really the difference between those two? Now let's start with online access control, because that's probably the access control topology that most people understand and that most people know today. In online access control, you would have a centralized server, which could be cloud-based, which is connected to all kinds of access panels or reader panels, which in their turn are connected to readers and connected to doors and locks and things like that. Now these connections usually are fixed and they enable real-time communication between all the devices. Which means that if I'm the administrator of this system and I want someone to get access to a building, I can easily authorize that person, that carrier, with the identifier that he or she is using to get access. And the moment I press that button, usually within a fairly short amount of time, that person actually will get access. And also, if that person is using, let's say, a badge to get access to a specific zone in that enterprise, that event is immediately known at the server. So it's in an online access control scenario, it's very easy to swiftly respond to whatever's going on in the environment. So in online access control, all the access rights, the authorizations and all the events are stored in a centralized database. They might be distributed to controllers for redundancy purposes, but in essence the administration is done centralized at that central server. Which means that if there's access rights being changed, that's immediately known throughout the enterprise. Now to enable that, you would have to have a lot of cabling, a lot of wiring. Because you can imagine, if I would have to know the door status, I would have to have a magnetic sensor that is telling me what the door status is. If I want to close the door, I need to be able to access that lock and tell that lock to close up. All this cabling, all this wiring usually requires significant installation effort. Now sometimes in new builds that's not the biggest problem, but maybe for retrofit or maybe in specific circumstances that may be tricky. And that's the reason that at a certain point in time people started thinking about different topologies, different scenarios. And they thought, okay, what if we could write the access rights not just in a centralized database but also on a card? So we would store the access rights on a MyFair Desfire or MyFair Classic card, on an HIDI class card. And if these access rights are written on the card, what I can then do is I can show that card to a reader or a lock with an integrated reader, and then that lock basically can run standalone and decide for itself whether it should open the door or not. And it could then also store those events which I would then retrieve afterwards later. Now you can imagine if you can get rid of most cabling and wiring of that online access control system and you would use that offline access control system, that would save you a lot of time, a lot of effort and a lot of money. So that is why these offline access control systems are so popular. But of course there's some downsides to the use of those systems as well. And we know that from the online system that the information from the readers to the panels to the server is more or less real time. In offline access control systems it takes much more time to propagate changes in authorization throughout the entire estate. It takes much more time to get information about events that are happening in the estate to that central server. Because usually what happens in these systems is there's maybe one or two online readers that are used to write the access rights on those cards, and then in addition network on card principles are used to propagate information from reader to card to other cards that are also in the system. So you can imagine that sometimes people are looking for a symbiosis of these two systems, and these actually exist. Now one of the first signs that these online and offline systems would merge in the future was the use of Zigbee locks, which would still be installed easily into doors and would communicate wirelessly to modules which would be installed above those ceilings. And then these modules, these Zigbee modules, would then be connected to the central server. So in that way you would still have real-time communication in place, but you wouldn't have the need of running all these cables in and around that door. Now that would just be the first step and is bringing some relief, but it's not really combining the benefits of both systems that much. What we see happening nowadays, and which is really exciting, is that vendors are seeing that if they use smartphones or wearables, that they actually have an additional communication layer in their system. So if you have an offline access control system and you're writing the access rights normally on a card, you could also write them on a phone, on the smartphone. But that smartphone is connected. So you wouldn't have to use the network on card principle to propagate authorization changes or events through this system. You could actually use the communication capabilities of those smartphones. And in that way you would have an offline access control system with all the benefits of an online system. And of course this is a simplified way of explaining it, and there's pros and cons of for both systems, and there's all kinds of intricacies that you have to think about. But in essence, this is the difference between offline access control and online access control, and what you can expect from it in the future when these two really start merging. So I hope this makes sense. Thanks very much for listening, and hope to see you soon at sekingroup.com. Bye bye.